Hello everyone! In this lesson, we will answer the question, what if a search has 0 results? So for example, if I searched for just a random gibberish phrase that I know won't have any matching content, here's our heading level 2, but as expected, we don't see any actual content down here. However, instead of just an empty area, we'd probably want to take it one step further and output a bit of text that reads, no general information matches that search. So without further ado, let's dive into the action and learn how to accomplish that. So over in our text editor, let's jump into the JavaScript modules folder and open search.js. And let's scroll down to our method named getResults. Here it is. So this is the template literal that we wrote in our previous lesson to generate the resulting HTML. Now, as we can already see back in the browser, if there are no results, then no list items will be generated. So we don't even need to wrap this line in any conditional logic, because if our posts parameter is empty, remember any incoming JSON data will live inside this parameter. If this is empty, then obviously the map method won't have any items inside the array to loop through. So we don't need to worry about this line of code. Let's shift our focus to this opening UL unordered list tag. Let's try to write a bit of conditional logic code so that if there are indeed results, we can output this code, but if there are no results, then not only will we not output this, but instead we can output a paragraph tag that reads, no general information matches that search. So if we want to set up a bit of conditional logic, our first instinct might be to use an if statement. However, in JavaScript, you are not allowed to use if statements within a template literal. Remember, a template literal is created by these backtick symbols here and here, and we did this so that we could break our code up into multiple lines, and also so we can easily mix and match and switch back and forth between plain text and expressions. Okay, but back to the topic at hand. If we are not allowed to use an if statement within a template literal, what can we do? Well, luckily there's a tool in JavaScript named the ternary operator that we can use within a template literal. So check this out. Let's select this opening UL line and let's cut this into our clipboard. And in its place on that line, let's write our first ternary operator. Now, because we are currently within a template literal, we want to begin by creating an expression. So to do that, remember it's $ curly brackets. Now, in some text editors, you need to be careful because watch this. If I type in the dollar symbol and then try to enter a curly bracket, notice how I got an opening curly bracket here, but my text editor automatically tried to insert a bogus closing curly bracket right here, 2 lines below where my cursor was. Now that's not what I wanted, and I wanted to point that out to you because if you're not really paying attention, you might miss the fact that your text editor does this. And then hunting down this error can be very frustrating. So I'm going to delete this closing curly bracket down here and say, no thank you text editor, I do not want that. Okay, and then back up on this line that I was trying to write, now I can just add in the closing curly bracket manually. Okay, so now everything's back to normal. We've got this new empty expression, and now let's write our first ternary operator. So first, the question is, what is a ternary operator? For now, just think of it as a shorthand or shortcut way of writing an if statement, right? It's a very short and compact way of setting up conditional logic. So first, we spell out a condition that we will check to see if it evaluates to true or false, just like we would with a traditional if statement. This isn't the real code, I'm just typing this out as an example. Okay, but right after your condition, then you add in a question mark, and then after that, you write out whatever code you want to run if this evaluates to true, and then right after that, you add a colon, not a semicolon, but a colon, and then you just write out whatever code you want to run if this evaluates to false. So it's very similar to an if statement, right? We're saying if this condition is true, do this, else, otherwise, do this. So for now, the question is, what should our condition be? Well, why don't we just check to see if the incoming JSON data has any items in the array? Let me show you what I mean. So back in the web browser, if I open up a WordPress REST API URL like this, so here's the root of my URL, and then if I add on WP-JSON, WP-v2, posts, and then if I search for just random gibberish that won't have any results, notice that WordPress only responds with a completely empty array. Whereas on the other hand, if the search actually did have results, we'd see a bunch of JSON data here. So back in our code, all we need to do for the condition is just say, remember our parameter name posts that will contain any JSON data that WordPress responds with. And then in JavaScript, every array has a property named length. And length will tell you how many items live inside the array. So if this is 0, if there are no items in the array, well, the number 0 always evaluates to false. And in just about every programming language in the world, any number larger than 0 evaluates to true. So this is all we need for the condition check. Now let's just spell out what we want to do if it's true or if it's false. So if the condition is true, let's delete the placeholder yay, and instead let's just output a pair of single quotes, and within the quotes we can just paste in our clipboard. Right? We want to output that opening unordered list tag. However, if our condition is false, let's delete this placeholder nay and open up a pair of single quotes, and let's just output an HTML paragraph that reads, no general information matches that search. Okay, now before we save this, let's deal with the closing unordered list tag. So down here, let's just delete this line and sort of do the same thing. So let's open up an expression within our overall template literal, and let's set up another quick ternary operator, right? A bit of conditional logic. So for the condition, we'll say if our posts array has a length of greater than 0, if that's the case, do something, otherwise do something else. So if that's true, let's just output a closing unordered list. But if it's not true, let's just output nothing. So just an empty pair of quotations. Okay, so let's give this a save and test it out. So if I search for lorem, as in lorem ipsum, I know that should have plenty of results. Perfect, here they are. But if I search for something that doesn't make any sense, we see no general information matches that search. Perfect. And at this point, that means we've answered the main question for this lesson. What if a search has 0 results? Now let's spend the remainder of this lesson making a few miscellaneous improvements to our search. So for example, the first thing that I want to fix is you'll notice that if I try to perform another search after I've already performed one, notice that the loader spinner icon does not immediately reappear. We would expect it to appear the millisecond I push a new key for a new search. So to fix this issue, all we need to do is back in our JavaScript, right after this section of code where we are using the HTML method to modify the results div, so right after the backtick and then the parenthesis and the semicolon, but notice my cursor is still within the getJSON method. Right here, let's just set the isSpinnerVisible property to false, right? Because as soon as this code runs, that will replace or hide the spinner. So let's save this and give it a try. If I search for lorem, here's the results. But now, the millisecond I start searching for something else, we see the loader spinner icon. Perfect. All right, changing gears, the next thing I want to work on is making sure that the REST API URL that we are using to actually perform the search, I want to make sure that this URL is relative instead of absolute. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, this URL is only going to work if I'm using my local preview proxy server that begins with localhost 3000. What if instead I was using my dev domain of fictionaluniversity.dev? Or better yet, what will happen when I try to deploy these files to a real live server with a real .com? Well, the answer is that this URL will fail miserably, right? Because this URL won't really exist in that context. So let me show you what I mean. if I go over to the command line and quit my gulp watch task, so if I press Control C, my gulp watch task is what was creating this proxy server of localhost 3000. So now, if I go to my browser and try to visit fictionaluniversity.dev, the website loads just fine, but if I try to perform a live search, the loader spinner icon is just going to keep spinning until the end of time. And if I inspect and go into the console, we see an error message, failed to load resource, and the resource that was impossible to load was that REST API URL here. So the question becomes, how can we make the beginning part of this URL flexible so that it works regardless of the current environment? Or so that it works if we want to distribute this theme to many, many websites and users. Now, your first instinct might be to just delete the beginning HTTP root part of the URL, like this, just begin with the / of what you want to add on, and this will indeed work for certain situations and certain websites. However, not all WordPress installations are located at the root of a domain. So this is not very flexible and it won't work for everyone in every situation. So instead, let me show you what I recommend. So right now, within our theme folder, let's jump into the file named functions.php. And let's scroll down to our function named University Files. Remember, this is the function where we load CSS and JavaScript files within WordPress. And right now, I just want to add a new line to this function. It doesn't matter where. You could do it at the top of the function or down at the bottom of the function. Just anywhere within this function. Let's say WP underscore localize underscore script. So this is a WordPress function that will let us output a little bit of JavaScript data into the source, the HTML source of the web page. Within the parentheses, this function takes 3 arguments. So just as a placeholder, let's say 1, 2, 3. Okay, now let's review each one. So for the first argument, we want to include the name or handle of our main JavaScript file. Or I should say the JavaScript file that you are trying to make flexible. So in my case, that's this main JavaScript file named scripts bundled. But the name or handle of this file is this first parameter, right after you call WP onQScript. So the name or handle of the file is main-university.js. Your name might be slightly different. The name doesn't matter. We just want the name to match. So down here within localized script for the first argument, let's type in a matching name. So main university JS. All right, now for the second argument, we just want to make up a variable name. The name does not matter. So I'm just going to call it maybe university data. Again, the name does not matter. Just make up a name. And then for the third argument, we just create an array of data that we want to be available in JavaScript. So let's say array, and remember in PHP, you include parentheses right after the word array to actually create one. And then we just spell out what data we want to live in this array. So I like to drop down to a new line in between the parentheses of array just to stay organized. And now let's just build an associative array. Now just to refresh your PHP memory, an example of an associative array would be cat equals meow, right? And then you could have a comma and another property, dog equals bark. But obviously that's not what we really want. Now back to the actual task at hand, back in our search.js file, remember our goal is that we want to make the first part of the URL flexible. So back in functions.php, what I'm going to do within this array is first you get to make up a property name, could be whatever you want, but I'm going to call it root underscore URL, and then I'm going to set that to equal the results of a WordPress function named get site URL. This function will return the URL for the current WordPress installation. Now if I save this, we can test it out by going into our web page and refreshing, And then let's view the HTML source for this page. So in Chrome, you can just right-click and choose View Page Source. And if we scroll down all the way to the bottom, here we see a little bit of JavaScript that WordPress is outputting for us. So you can see WordPress created a variable named University Data, and it's an object, and it has a property named root URL with a value of exactly what we would expect. Now, in about 20 seconds from now, we will learn how to use this value in our JavaScript, but first I want to show you how useful this object is, because you can really build it out to contain as many properties as you want. So back in functions.php, right after this root URL line, we could add a comma, and then since it's an array, we could just create as many other properties as we want. So we could say sky equals blue, and grass equals green. And if I save that and then refresh the view source, you can see we still have this one convenient object or variable, university data, and the different properties just get added on to that object. Sky blue, grass green. Okay, so this is a very, very useful function that we've got here. Now, we don't actually need the sky or grass, so let's delete that. And now let's jump back to our JavaScript file, search.js, and all we need to do to make our URL flexible now is delete this hard-coded beginning root part of the URL. So now we've got a string that begins with /wp-json, and right before this, right before the quotes even, let's just say university data, because this is the name of that variable in our view source, right? var university data. And then it's an object, so to look inside it, we can just say dot root URL, and that will give us this flexible URL value. So back in the JavaScript, university data dot root URL. And then let's just say plus, and then the rest of our URL string here. Okay, so if I go ahead and save this, keep in mind that we do need to rebundle up and compile our JavaScript. So in the command line, instead of running gulp watch, I'm just going to run a one-time gulp scripts. And then back in the browser, if I refresh my fictionaluniversity.dev website, and now if I try to perform a search, perfect. We've successfully made that URL relative. So now our code will work on a live public server, or we could even share this theme with others. And that's going to bring this lesson to a close. Our next lesson is going to be super short and quick. We're just going to make a few minor user experience improvements to our search overlay. But looking ahead beyond that, you might be wondering, how can we search for content that isn't a post? Right? How can we search for other post types? So instead of posts, what about pages, or professors, or campuses, or events? Well, that's exactly what we're going to learn how to do right after our next really quick lesson. Let's keep it rolling, and I will see you then.